Welcome back to Digital Deceptions. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about Operation Wetback and the true history behind it. So, Operation Wetback launched in 1954 under President Dwight D. Eisenhower. It remains one of the most controversial immigration enforcement campaigns in U.S. history. It was a large-scale militarized effort to remove undocumented Mexican migrants from the U.S. The operation involved massive roundups, radical profiling, and the deportation of both undocumented migrants and U.S. citizens of Mexican descent. Although it was presented at the time as a necessary measure to restore order at the border, historians now widely view it as a deeply flawed and harmful policy. In recent years, Operation Wetback has re-entered public conversation because President Donald Trump has repeatedly referenced it as a modern model for immigration enforcement. During campaign speeches, Trump has described Operation Wetback as a successful large-scale deportation program that he has intended to replicate on a much larger scale. However, those descriptions differ significantly from the historical record. Understanding these differences requires you to look closely at what Operation Wetback actually was, how immigration enforcement today, and how political narratives can reshape public memory of past events. Operation Wetback was launched in June of 1954 by Immigrations and Naturalization Services, INS, led by Commissioner Joseph Swing. It was designed to address rising unauthorized immigration during a time when the U.S. Agriculture Department heavily relied on Mexican labor. The Bureau program legally brought Mexican workers into the U.S., but many employers preferred undocumented workers because they were cheaper and easier to exploit. To respond to political pressures, the Eisenhower administration authorized a massive enforcement campaign. Officers conducted raids, roadblocks, sweeps of farms and neighborhoods, and massive detentions. Many people were arrested simply for looking Mexican. Deportees were transported by bus, truck, train, and even some by ship to remote areas of Mexico. Conditions were often unsafe, overcrowded, and some deportees died during transportation. Historical records show that the operation resulted in 17,695 formal deportations and over 232,000 returns. Voluntary departures under threat of arrest during the 1955 fiscal year, those numbers are far lower than the millions sometimes claimed in political rhetoric. Modern-day immigration enforcement is fundamentally different than it was in the 1950s in several ways. Today, immigration enforcement is considered by constitutional protections, court rulings, and civil rights laws. Racial profiling and mass roundup based solely on appearance is illegal. Migrants have access to immigration courts, asylum hearings, and legal representation. Technology and surveillance enforcement now rely heavily on drones, sensors, biometrics, databases, and digital tracking. Border Patrol and ICE operate under far more complex legal and technical systems. Humanitarian standards, while considered at detention centers, remain controversial. There are far greater public scrutiny, mass media coverage, and legal oversight than there was in the 1954s. International human rights standards influence policy in ways that did not exist during the Eisenhower era. The U.S. population is much larger today, and the undocumented population is more deeply integrated into our communities. Mass deportations on the scale of Operation Wetback would require enormous resources and legal challenges. According to reporting from the Conservation and Milwaukee Independent, President Trump has repeatedly promised to carry out the largest domestic deportation operations in American history, and has cited Operation Wetback as a model too. However, these statements differ from the historical record in several key ways. Historical evidence shows it was limited and short-lived. Trump has suggested that Operation Wetback deported millions and solved illegal immigration. In reality, the operation deported far fewer people than often claimed, and migration resumed shortly afterwards. President Trump frames it as a clean, efficient, operation. Historical accounts describe it as widespread abuse. Trump's speeches rarely mention the radical profiling, wrongful deportations of U.S. citizens, unsafe transportation conditions, or humanitarian violations documented by historians. Trump suggests it can be easily replicated today. Experts say this is legally and logistically unrealistic. Modern immigration law and constitutional protections and the scale of today's undocumented population make the 1954 style operation far more difficult. Vice versa, though, notes that Trump proposed deportation numbers far exceed historical records and would require unprecedented resources and legal challenges. Trump uses Operation Wetback as a symbolic reference. The historical operation was far more complex and problematic. Trump's references simply simplify and complicated even into political talking points. Historians emphasize the Operation Wetback is now widely criticized, not celebrated. Operation Wetback was a harsh, militarized enforcement campaign that caused significant harm and violated civil rights. Modern immigration enforcement operates under a very different legal, technological, and humanitarian framework. While President Trump has invoked Operation Wetback as a model for modern policy, his description often differs from the historical reality documented by scholars and journalists. Understanding these differences is essential for evaluating immigration policy today. History shows that mass deportation campaigns are not only harmful but also ineffective in addressing the deeper economic and social forces that drive migration and political narratives. Many simplify the past, but a careful look at the evidence reveals a far more complicated and cautionary story. If you've made it this far, please like, subscribe, and share. Have a good night, and thank you for being viewers.